Listen to this podcast, or I'll gut you.
Welcome back, Horror Hounds, to Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show podcast.
I'm Mike Ghostman Pickle.
And I'm James Rivera.
We're going to have one more special, October special this month. We've been doing subgenres all month. But as we said last week, we're doing something special this week where, since it's the day before Halloween, we're going to go over the entire Halloween franchise. And James and I share a lot of the same opinions on this, so we brought in a special guest, Will Walker. Everybody welcome Will Walker to the show.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yes. So we invited Will Walker on because he has a bit of a following himself. We've actually discussed Will on the podcast before. He did a fan edit of the Pet Sematary remake, and Mike and I vastly prefer it to the garbage theatrical cut that made it into theaters. And he has some interesting opinions on the Halloween franchise that are not quite aligned with ours, so we thought we might bring him in.
Yeah, and especially because I insisted that he could not make the Pet Sematary remake any better, and he proved me wrong. So let's see if he's going to prove us wrong today.
I'll try my best.
All right. So let's get into it. So we're going to go through all of them. So we're starting with Halloween 1978. Am I correct, Michael?
Yeah, but as far as the entire franchise, all the films have grossed about $640 million worldwide. And that makes it the #1 franchise in the U.S. box office, only when adjusted for inflation.
Oh, okay. So if not adjusted for inflation, it would probably be like Saw or Paranormal Activity or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll start off with Halloween from 1978. Of course, it's the director and composer John Carpenter, and the writers are John Carpenter and Deborah Hill. This one was made for a $325,000 budget, and it made $70 million worldwide. It started the slasher craze, and in my opinion, it's better than any of them, and especially because of the superb directing, the suspense, and the music.
My take on this is the original Halloween holds a special place in my heart. I wouldn't say it's the scariest horror movie I've ever seen, but it just might be my favorite in terms of rewatchability anyway. There's something about it that I find kind of magical. It's a very low budget movie, obviously, but the way that it's filmed has a very classical filmmaking style, and there's a kind of an elegance to the simplicity of the movie and the story and the manner in which it's told. And I like this version of Michael Myers in the first one because what we basically have here in Halloween 1 is something of a fairy tale. It's just a simple story about good versus evil. And in this case, good is just, a regular teenage girl, which would be Jamie Lee Curtis, just trying to do the right thing and live her life. And then evil is Michael Myers, pure, unexplainable terror. I like the look of this movie. I think that there's an interesting, it takes place in Illinois, but if you really look at the neighborhood, it was filmed in California in different places. And it has the kind of feel where this could happen anywhere in America. There's something very unique about the original Halloween. Doesn't have the best kill scenes of a slasher movie, but I don't really think that's what makes it a good movie. It's more of the suspense and the buildup and the presence of evil. What's your take on the original Halloween, Will?
Well, I respect the original Halloween immensely. What it did for the slasher genre, what it did for the horror genre in general. I think that Donald Pleasance as Samuel Loomis is one of the best performances in film history. I love that performance. I think that he's synonymous with the franchise, and I think when he unfortunately passed down the line, I think that the franchise really lost something special. He's almost like a modernized Von Helsing to me, and probably the most gothic element of these movies, which is a big reason why I appreciated him so much. I think that the musical score is obviously top-notch, one of the most iconic film scores in history. But apart from those two aspects, it didn't. I struggle to really get into it that much. I don't find the film that scary. And maybe that could be because there have been so many films like Halloween that have come out since, so many slashers that have adopted many of its hallmarks. Many of its tropes that we tend to take the film for granted. But it never really invested me that much. I didn't find Michael that interesting as just, you know, a guy in a mask who, you know, kills people. That's all the depth that I feel Michael has in the first film is stuff that Loomis tells us, and his dialogue is great, and I think that it does enrich the character. But in the end, I don't really feel Michael's presence that much in other aspects. I didn't find him very intimidating. I struggled to take a lot of the kills seriously, which again is a hallmark of when it came out, and you know, it being the first, not the first, but like the most iconic slasher at the time. But for me, I think I respect it, but I don't really enjoy the first film that much, and I never really found Laurie to be that interesting of a character, to be honest. And I feel like she fell very deeply into into the final girl trope, where I feel like she's just this very blank slate, ordinary, happy Christian girl from like a well-off suburban family. And I guess I just don't really find those kind of characters very interesting after I've seen their narratives so many times. And again, like, I can see why people enjoy the simplicity of that, but for me, I guess I just expected a little bit more. But I do respect the film immensely.
I somewhat agree about your point about Michael Myers, because just as a figure, as a killer, he's not that intimidating, not that impressive, but all the elements together with the music, and like you said, what Dr. Loomis says about him being pure evil, and the gravitas of his speeches, it kind of makes you feel the tension and the dangerousness of Michael Myers. And for me, it grabs you right from the opening. You get the POV of a killer. It's mysterious. You kind of think it might be a kid, and then it ends up being the kid, and it's become iconic since then, and I think for good reason. And then you go into this almost you're kind of being introduced to the characters, and it's almost mundane conversation, but it's mundane conversation that's still interesting. It still lets you know who the characters are, just enough to know them to where you feel when they die. So even when it's mundane, Michael Myers constantly stalking in the background keeps the tensions high. Like all the many scenes, like Michael Myers standing behind the bush, behind the shrubs, Michael Myers standing in the clothesline, and then with Loomis's lines like the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes, all that stuff together, I think is what makes Mike Myers a threat.
See, I disagree with you, Will, but I actually do understand where you're coming from in regards to Michael Myers and Laurie. And this is something that's either going to work for people or it's not going to work with people. My thing with Laurie Strode is that I kind of get what you mean, where she's something of a bland suburban girl, like one of many. But I also think that there's in the performance, there's a couple of things that suggest kind of a struggling inner life. Like, there's a part where when Laurie is walking home and then she's talking to Annie, and Annie's asking her why she doesn't go out with more boys, and she kind of just says very distractedly and offhandedly, guys think I'm too smart, in a very shy way. And there's a lot of line readings like that whenever the girls, which were two friends who are much more open and I guess more sexually adventurous teenagers, every time the topic comes up, you could see the timidness come in. You could sense that Laurie knows that she's a smart person, but is still kind of figuring out who she is. And I think that's easy for a young audience member to project onto her. So it's not like a ton of details in terms of her character, but I think it's just enough that she becomes kind of like an everyday suburban girl struggling with life, trying to do the right thing. And as far as Michael goes, I like that he doesn't have a motivation, because the concept of a child picking up a knife and killing somebody at age 6 for no reason is already creepy as it is. There's lots of psychology that you could get down that would explain it, but the idea that there isn't any reasoning behind it And the idea that Michael Myers stopped speaking when he was 6 years old after he killed his sister kind of conveys the idea, to me anyway, that he stopped speaking because once he killed his sister, he had already found his voice. That's the only way he could express himself. And that comes back again later in 2018 when the twisted doctor wants yelling at Michael Myers to say something. All he does is crush his head because he doesn't have anything to say. If you want to get any form of expression from Michael, I think that's it. And I think that they're supposed to be like kind of simple archetypes for Michael. You could project on any fear that you want onto him, whether anything going on in your life, and you could project anything onto Laurie. And I think it's that elegance and simplicity and the feeling of it being a fairy tale. And another thing, I don't know if I would say Halloween is a slasher movie, even though it is one. Only in the sense that when it was designed, I don't think that John Carpenter was thinking that this is a slasher movie, like this is a hack and slash movie. I look at it as a movie about pure evil versus pure good. That's the best way I could describe it. But again, that's my opinion, and I've actually shown it to people who did not respond to Halloween as much as I do. Like I've had plenty of people who love it, and some people don't get it. Either the simplicity works for you, or you need a little bit more kind of explanation. But I like the elegance of it.
Well,
yeah,
go ahead.
I was gonna say I can appreciate that, and like part of it is that like I was never that much of a mainstream 70s horror guy. The horror that I grew up with, and like the horror that really influenced my taste the most, is horror from the 30s and the 40s. And I think when the 70s and Halloween came along, we saw a major shift in, you know, what horror really was. Like we were sort of moving much farther out of that kind of gothic territory. There are still elements, like I said, there's still elements of Halloween that are gothic, like Loomis, but like we're moving into a much more contemporized era of horror, and whether that's a good thing or not really comes down to preference. But I think that may have been sort of why I came out of the original Halloween being like, you know, somewhat underwhelmed, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Even though it's a simple, straightforward story of good versus evil, I think there's still a lot of little details that make it special. Like Annie getting in the car and she notices the condensation on the windows before anything happens. So you feel that panic right away before you even see Michael Myers. Mm-hmm. And then he jumps up in the back seat and kills her. And you know her enough from being Laurie's best friend that you feel that kill. Mm-hmm. And then it goes right into PJ Souls and her boyfriend, where Myers impales the boyfriend through the neck and sticks him to the wall, and he's hanging on the wall, and he just stares at his lifeless body and tilts his head almost like a dog. And then that goes right into the sheet being over his head with the boyfriend's glasses on. That's a whole panic-inducing, suspenseful scene, and that goes right into Myers choking PJ and then picking up the phone. That iconic image of him picking up the phone, and then the body discovery leads to the satisfying climax and the closet scene, and it's just such a great climax.
Also,
I will say the boyfriend kill is definitely a highlight of the film. Yeah. I always saw the head tilt was like a little bit more like he was almost admiring his own work. Like he almost like views his kills as like an art, almost so to speak. But that was just my interpretation.
It's almost childlike. I get what you say, like he's art, but I also like that, at least when I'm watching it, every time I see it, when Michael is doing, he doesn't just kill people, he stalks them for a long time and has very creepy behavior. So what gets me is that it does look kind of like he's admiring his work, but I think it's just that whenever you're watching him do this very strange thing, it's the idea that I cannot ever figure out what is going on inside that head that kind of gets under my skin. Like it's that lack of a motive that really gets under my skin. And nothing wrong with actually having a killer have motives. It depends on the type of story that you're trying to tell. Obviously, if you're doing something a little bit more realistic, you're going to want a little bit more motivation. But I view this film as a fairy tale. And for me, why it's kind of the perfect horror movie, because it gets horror down to its most basic elements, good versus evil. And that's what I like about it.
So that brings us to Halloween 2. That's 3 years after the first one. This one, I have a weird kind of opinion on this one because I did love it when I was a kid. I wanted to see more Michael Myers, and it gave me what I wanted. But when you look back at it with a more critical eye, it kind of falls apart in a lot of different places. This one's directed by Rick Rosenthal, and it was also written by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, like the first one. And the composers were once again John Carpenter, but this time with Alan Howarth. But this was the first film to kill the franchise because it was a $2.5 million budget and it only made $25.5 million domestically. But there's a lot of things to like about this one. It's actually a good slasher. It just falls apart under scrutiny, unlike the first one does. Like the Mr. Sandman opening up the movie, the song Mr. Sandman, I think has become iconic since then. And then you see the end of number 1, and that's when the problems start. Like as you informed me before, James, that they used a different alternate take from part 1 to show the ending of part 1 and part 2, but it has a really bad fall off the balcony. It almost looks like a video game glitch where Loomis is shooting him and he's backing his way off the balcony. All of a sudden he steps up on the railing and he falls back. So that's where the problem started with me.
What do you think of this, Will? I'm going to get to mine last. What do you think of Halloween 2? Because I don't think I've ever heard your opinions on this one.
Halloween 2, Halloween 2 feels just like a much meaner, less graceful version of the first to me, which, as I said, I already wasn't huge on. It leans very hard into torture porny kills, which I already don't like on principle, but I like a lot less given how the characters in this film are just absolutely detestable. There's this one doctor who's like sexually harassing the other employees and just being really unfunny, making these just really bad sex jokes. People being like melted in like hot baths and stuff. It just feels really gross and off-putting. And I wasn't, like I said, I didn't really like the characters in the original that much for the most part, besides Loomis, but I didn't hate them. I didn't, like I could spend time with them and like, tolerate it. I hated the characters in Halloween 2. I just, like every time they're on screen, I just, they dragged out the film. They made it just a chore to get through. I thought that like bringing in the pseudo love interest kind of character that Laurie falls for with one of the doctors was cheesy and lame and something that the film didn't need. About the only things that I really do like about Halloween 2 are I actually prefer Loomis in Halloween 2 a little bit more than I do in the first Halloween. I think that I'm of the opinion that like Pleasance brings more and more layers to this character with his subsequent films that he appears in. And the other thing that I like is the idea that Michael is Laurie's sibling, because I think it gives a reason for him to keep coming back in subsequent films. This is like one of the problems that I have with the 2018 reboot that we'll get into later. But in that film, Michael doesn't really have that much of a reason to keep going after Laurie. He doesn't have any real connection to her. He doesn't really have any bias. He's just a killer who goes around. He's just a killer who goes around killing people. And here, he has like a very personal connection that like would explain why he's obsessed with her.
Okay. Well, my thing with Halloween 2 is that I think that as a slasher movie, it's pretty decent. My opinions of this movie, honestly, after rewatching the whole franchise, I used to think this is one of the better sequels. I don't think that anymore after going through the whole franchise one at a time. I'm not a fan of the sibling twist like you are for the reasons that I like the mysterious version of Michael Myers. But this is where I could see how that would definitely be more up your alley. Um, one of the best things about this movie is Dr. Loomis. It's hard not to love the beginning of the film when Dr. Sam Loomis comes out screaming about Michael Myers, and
I shot him 6 times.
yes,
Yeah.
when he says, "You don't know what death is." That's one of the best line readings of Sam Loomis in the whole series. But it just feels like it started taking on elements of the slasher movies that inspired, instead of being more like the original, in the sense that I like the characters of the original Halloween. Be it Annie could be a little bit annoying, but I think she's meant to be annoying because we all know teenage girls who act like that. But this is kind of like some of the Friday 13th sequels, especially the lesser ones, where the characters are really irritating and you just sit around waiting for them to get killed. And that's not very exciting when there isn't characters to root for. The love interest comes out of nowhere and actually serves no purpose, and it builds up to nothing.
Oh, yeah.
Jamie Lee Curtis gets short shrift in this movie. That she's not really the star of this movie, but for some reason she's still the final girl, even though she's taken a backseat through most of the movie. So that doesn't really work for me either. And I'm not sure if it was the best idea to try to continue the story on the same night. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree.
And go on, Michael.
Every character was completely wasted in this movie, including Laurie Strode, except for Loomis.
Mm-hmm.
Loomis, I can see why Will likes him more in this one. He becomes a little crazier, and his speeches become a little bit more unhinged.
Understandably so, if you've shot many times.
And it starts with that line, like you said, with the guy coming out, the neighbor coming out pissed out of his house at the beginning. He said, "I've been trick-or-treated to death tonight." And Loomis like, "You don't know what death is."
Death is.
Yeah, but then you get these really cool POV shots of Mike Myers walking the streets, and then you introduce the paramedics who you think are going to be good characters, but then they're wasted. And then you get the cop that hits another guy dressed like Michael Myers. Why would another guy be dressed like Michael Myers on the same night? No one knows who this guy is.
They make it obvious that it's not him because he has like the blonde wig. So like as soon as it happened, I was like, that's not Michael Myers. It's like putting aside, they're not gonna like kill him that quickly, but it's just it doesn't work.
It seems like the nurses are going to be good characters, but then they're wasted too, and they're like you said, they're abused by these misogynistic male characters, and then but you still have some very memorable slasher sequences, like the hot tub scene. But then around the hot tub scene is when you start realizing that the hospital is way too empty.
Oh yes,
it completely takes you out of the movie.
It was really empty.
Yeah, there's nobody in there. No matter how much people run around screaming, nobody comes out to even see what's going on.
I think it's a really unrealistic setting, the hospital. I forgot to bring that up. It's like 2 or 3 doctors are working in this big hospital, a couple of nurses. It's really dark and underlit to give it a horror movie setting. You don't see any patients besides Laurie really walking around. It is not believable as a place that exists. And then at the end, when everything gets blown up, you're like, so did they blow up all the patients in the hospital too? Does nobody care? Like, it's like it doesn't even register with the cops that they just blew up a hospital where theoretically people are supposed to be in there. So I have no idea what the hell was going on with that location. It was just silly. That's how.
Speaking of silly crap that like you can't take seriously, there's this one part where Michael like he barges through a glass door, and it just looks ridiculous. It looks like something out of a spoof film. Yeah. And then and then he just like falls a little bit like right after that, and it's so goofy. Like it's right up there with like the Busta Rhymes stuff and like Halloween Resurrection for like just like demasculating Michael moments. And
so
and some of the characters like inexplicably disappearing for long periods of time, and then just where is that guy? And all of a sudden he appears like the guy that was the potential love interest with the fro. Yeah, like he just disappears for a long period of time, and all of a sudden you see him, and he's very stupidly slips in the blood and knocks himself out, And then he appears again like he's going to try to save Laurie, and he just gets in the car with her and exposes her hiding place and passes out on the horn. Like, it's just bumbling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I didn't like the way they revealed, like, I would have dug the reveal of that Laurie was his sister more if somebody would have figured it out, instead of just like, the governor opened a secret file that says that Laurie is his sister. Come on.
It's pretty contrived.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not a fan of that twist. There are ways to do that twist and do it a little bit better. Funny enough, I'm not crazy about the
Listen to this
like
podcast,
Rob
or
Zombie's
I'll
take
gut
on
you.
Halloween, but he has a better reason for that than there is in the original movies. It's more organic, the way that they find out. So that's the way.
That has to be one of the only times like we could ever describe anything in Rob Zombie's Halloween as organic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's organic to me. So I actually think that Rob Zombie had a better reasoning for that, but alas, we're not there yet.
Damn, that's harsh.
So, as I said, Halloween 2 wasn't the success they thought it would be, so it kind of killed the franchise so much that they thought they had to abandon Michael Myers and create Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, which has nothing to do with him. This is directed by Tommy Lee Wallace, who directed the It miniseries. So this was the second movie to kill the franchise. It was a $2.5 million budget, and it made only $14.4 million. This is the one I only recently came to appreciate this. It screened at the rated R Speakeasy, and it was very entertaining. It really benefits from restoration, because the really bad look of it and the bad quality of it really added to the campiness of it. So it doesn't seem quite as campy. And Tom Atkins is the man. I love everything he's in. Tom Atkins is a doctor who investigates the Silver Shamrock Shakes, and then it has a really good performance from Dan O'Hurley, who plays the villain Connell Cochran, the owner of Silver Shamrock. But I know we probably won't go too much into detail on this because this has nothing to do with the Michael Myers saga. So what do you guys think of it?
All right, I actually kind of liked it. I'll be honest with you. I'd only seen it in parts as when I was younger, and I dismissed it. When I rewatched it, I realized, oh wait, I've never actually seen the whole way through. It's actually a good movie onto itself if you remove it from the Halloween saga. I think it has some really good makeup effects. I think the premise is inventive. It's kind of interesting how they try to tie it into Halloween, because this has to do with the Samhain ritual that they speak about in Halloween 2 and kind of gets elaborated further on in the Jamie Lloyd films. And it's also kind of funny to see them playing the original Halloween on TV, where people are going, the immortal classic Halloween. I like Tom Atkins. I thought it was a pretty inventive premise. It's a good horror movie, but I'm going to say this. There is a cult behind it that really loves it, and while I could kind of see why, there's also a part of me that thinks that if this movie didn't have the Halloween name stuck to it and didn't have that controversy, I don't know if we would still be talking about this movie years later. Despite how much I enjoyed it, I don't know if people would still be talking about Season of the Witch if it were just Season of the Witch instead of Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. What about you, Will?
Oh man.
Okay.
Okay, I'm someone who doesn't hold the original Halloween with like a particularly special reverence, and so when I heard there was a Halloween sequel that like moved away from Michael Myers, I was fairly intrigued. I don't like anything in this movie, like literally anything. Like I if I had to really stretch, I'd say I like the actor who played Cochran. What was his name? He was in RoboCop 2.
Dan O'Hurley.
Yeah, Dan O'Hurley. I think his performance is fine, but even then the character is just so weird, and like he has just so many anachronistic elements that like don't mesh well and like don't make sense. He's like a millionaire TV producer, but he's also like this pagan ritualist who's like killing kids because reasons that like aren't even really explained that well. And I think that the musical score is just grating and irritating. It feels like like a really amateur impression of what Carpenter was trying to do with his synth. I think Tom Atkins' character is just irritating, and like he has this romance with this like college girl character, which is just really creepy and off-putting, and I don't like that element at all.
Can I pause you really quick there, Will? To be clear, in all of these movies, particularly everything after the first one, there's a lot of things that have to do with the male-female characters. The relationships are pretty dated and questionable, especially when you look at them now.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'll definitely agree with that. But I just think Halloween 3 is like maybe the worst defender of that. But it's slim pickings, that whole from a lot of the romance stuff here, and I thought the plot was just weird and kind of dumb and didn't make sense. I really don't like Halloween 3, which is a shame because I went into it like, okay, they're embracing the more pagan elements of the holiday, the origins of Sam Hain. All right, let's do this. But didn't work. Really didn't work for me. It's also just one more thing. It's also just very boring. Like everyone brings up how like dark and brutal the film is, but it takes a while to get there. And until then, pretty much the only action that happens is like you have this weird side thing with like androids that like doesn't really fit the aesthetic at all. But whatever. It's one of my most hated horror films, probably Halloween 3.
Okay.
Yeah, I liked it, but I can completely understand why anybody wouldn't, because I don't like it for the same reason that I like any of the other Halloween films. I like it for how funny and how cheesy and strange it is. So I can understand why somebody would be turned off by that, for sure.
For me, it's an enjoyable film that's a little bit overhyped by people who I feel are just trying to love it because it's the Halloween sequel nobody likes and it did something different. And I think some people like it just because it's different, not because it actually works. But I digress. That is Halloween 3, Season of the Witch.
So after that, Halloween 3 was the second film to kill the franchise. We had Halloween 4 a few years later in 1988, The Return of Michael Myers. This one was directed by Dwight H. Little, who also directed Phantom of the Opera, one of my favorite movies, Rapid Fire, with Brandon Lee, one of my favorite action movies anyway, and Marked for Death with Steven Seagal, so it's kind of weird that an action director would do this. But there's 5 writers on this, and you can tell that it's 5 writers. It's a $5 million budget, and it only made $17.7 million in the box office. And it also had a writer, Alan B. McElroy, who also wrote Rapid Fire, Spawn, and Wrong Turn. Donald Pleasance returns in this, and he's awesome. Danielle Harris is 11, and she's really good in it. But it's just the cheesy guard that explains the plot and catches everyone up. Just turned me off right away. And of course, they're transferring Michael Myers, genius. Of course, he's going to get away. And then one of the worst masks of the franchise, when Michael Myers steals the mask from a drugstore to explain why it's so bad. And then I do like the Loomis drinking booze with a crazy old preacher, and he starts smiling. He gets even weirder in this one. And then also in this one, Michael Myers is literally everywhere. He can get from one side of the town completely to the other side of the town in a split second. And then the kills and the setups none of them are particularly interesting except for the thumb through the forehead.
Ooh. Oh man.
All right, Will, let's Will before I go in and counter this. I want to hear what Will has to say about this one. I actually know what you think of this, but let's hear it anyway.
I love this movie so much. It is my second favorite Halloween film. This is when I like marathoned all the films together with a friend of mine who's like a big Halloween fan. Like before then, I was like, I don't really get the appeal of this franchise. I watched Halloween 4. I totally get it. All of my problems with the previous films, I think this one fixes. I think Ellie Cornell's Rachel is so much more interesting and layered than Laurie was. She doesn't feel like a tropey 70s horror protagonist. She feels like an everyday teenage girl, and that's warts and all, I would say. I think Danielle Harris's performance is outstanding.
Yes.
This film introduces George P. Wilbur as the Shape. He's my personal favorite Michael Myers. I like how imposing and just bulky he is. The Michael in parts 2 and 1 was like a fairly skinny and short and frail, and like not. But here he's this physically indomitable juggernaut of evil, and I really like that. I think that a lot of the action set pieces in the film are very well set up. They feel epic, but at the same time, like not overblown. I think that the roof scene just has me on the edge of my seat when Jamie's trying to escape Michael from the roof and Rachel's trying to help her down. I love their dynamic in the film so much. I was heartbroken when I thought Rachel died in this film, and just so relieved when she managed to make it out. And you could chalk her survival up to convenience and plot armor, but I love that character so much, and she was everything I was hoping to get from Laurie in the first couple films. I love the deaths in this movie. I think the shotgun through the chest was just brilliant. It's one of my favorite kills. The mask could use some work. That's probably the worst element of the film. I'll concede to that. It does look cheesy, but I think George P. Wilbur does such a good job in the role that I can easily ignore it. And I also really like how the film moves a little bit away from Myers, but not too much away from the Halloween identity. I think what the film set up with Jamie having the same curse that Michael did and becoming the new killer, it brought things back to what made the original so scary. This idea that a little kid could pick up a knife and stab someone who they were more close to than anyone. I thought that was a genius way of tying things back to the original film, and I love Alan B. McElroy's script. I think he's a very underrated screenwriter, and Loomis in this film is just wonderful, and it has one of my favorite quotes in the entire series when he's like, I prayed that he would burn in hell, but I realized hell would not have him. Yeah. He says that with such an earnestness and such a vulnerability and fear that I think we never really see from Loomis before. This is probably the most scared Loomis has been in any of the films before or since. And to see that from a character who is this confident paragon of heroism, I think it makes for a much scarier and more suspenseful film. This is the guy who is constantly in control, who knows all about Michael, who's more prepared and ready for everyone, and he's on pins and needles, just full goosebumps. I think that it really makes for a much stronger film. So sorry for the long rant. I love Halloween 4. Definitely one of my favorites.
I've noticed that Halloween 4 seems to be kind of like the dream warriors.
Listen to this podcast
of the Halloween franchise. It's the one that I've noticed has the biggest fan base outside of the first one, especially because of the Jamie Lloyd story and Danielle Harris. I have an interesting relationship with this film. I actually watched it again last night, and I had watched it about, I think, a month and a half ago. We discussed that movie on the podcast. On the one hand, this still follows the thing I don't like about Michael Myers, the sibling thing, which doesn't work for me. However, I actually do think that they did a better job handling the family bloodline aspects of this one much better than the second one did. I thought the second one did it just seemed kind of contrived, like Michael said. Like, it just seems to kind of know where that, oh yeah, the secret files that the governor like just unsealed, whatever, some bullshit like that. This one actually feels a little bit better in that regard. I actually see why people love Danielle Harris so much. She's actually pretty fantastic, especially for such a young performer. I can't imagine what it must have took for her to perform these movies, because 4 and 5, she gives pretty intense performances, probably more intense than somebody that age should be giving. The mask doesn't work for me, and I have mixed feelings about the kills. On the one hand, most of them are not set up very interesting to me. The what was it? The shotgun or the rifle?
The shotgun through the chest.
Okay, the shotgun through the chest kind of strains belief for my taste a little bit. And I do think he kind of appears too many times in different places. I do love Dr. Loomis in this movie. I love how he becomes more and more, I don't know if unhinged is the right word because I don't want to portray him in a bad way, but yeah, kind of unhinged as the movies go on. So I really liked him. I think this movie does like some interesting things with the Halloween franchise, and I really like the ending that you were talking about earlier. I think it has a very interesting ending. I just wish that they followed up on that ending better. I felt like the ending of this movie seems like it could have taken the franchise in a completely different direction. The last moment with Jamie standing there in the clown suit, and
I
Dr.
completely agree.
Oh my God, the way he does and the way it builds up, it felt like, okay, here's a way to keep the same storyline going, but we could keep it going in an organic, fresh way. So I'm not a terribly big fan of this movie, but I do think there's a lot of merit to it. There's some good acting in it, and I think it does something interesting with the franchise, and it handles the bloodline elements of the story far better than Halloween 2 did. So strangely enough, I used to like Halloween 2 more than Halloween 4, but upon rewatching, I think that this is probably the better film between those sequels.
I do think after rewatching it, I do think 4 is better than 2.
But we used to be the other way around, though.
Yeah, and I liked 4 a lot when I was a kid. I didn't like it near as much when I rewatched it, but I can't really argue against the merits of it too much because it had so many great elements. The great performance by Danielle Harris, the awesome performance as always from Donald Pleasance, and it was a good Michael Myers besides the bad mask. His movements and how menacing he was well done.
So I think it's an enjoyable sequel. And I could see why some people are. It's still not my idea of what Halloween should be, but it's still a little bit closer. And I do think Michael is scarier here than he was in Halloween 2. So I have mixed feelings on it. I think I'm a little more positive than I am negative now, especially after a couple of rewatches, because there is so much good going on in this movie that I simply just cannot deny it.
I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Very happy to hear that.
So since they had a somewhat decent success with that one, the very next year they came out with Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers. This one's directed and co-written by Dominique Otherin-Girard, and she did Omen 4 and not much else of merit. It was a $6 million budget and only made $11.6 million, so it wasn't nearly as successful as the last one. It's 1 year after number 4. Michael returns on Halloween to kill Jamie. Yawn. Another shitty mask. Another great performance by Danielle Harris, and an even better performance from Donald Pleasance. I think he was even better than this in this one than in 4. But there's just too many cheap jump scares. It's really silly escape by Michael Myers in the beginning, and overall it's just too generic. So it has some great kills that almost make it great, but not quite. But when Myers kills Rachel, played by Ellie Cornell, who you think is the star early on, is pretty effective. And then Loomis's rants. His rants to the sheriff, and especially his rants to Jamie, this little girl. He's like browbeating her and screaming in her face that tears won't get you anywhere. So
this was unhinged. James, you were saying that you feel bad about like calling Loomis unhinged in any of the movies. He was unhinged here.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't hesitate to call him that here. All right, here's my thing. I don't like the opening of this movie. The way that Michael survives that shootout seems so contrived and lazy.
Yeah.
Some of it's kind of laughable. And what I don't like is I like the ending of Halloween 4. It opens up new directions for the franchise. I'm especially interested in the idea that she's possessed by whatever it is that compelled Michael to kill his sister. That's kind of cool. They dial that back here too much, where it seems like, oh, she didn't really kill her aunt. She just stabbed her too many times and hurt. And I got the impression from Halloween 4 that she had just murdered her aunt. I know we don't actually see it, but I'm pretty sure that that's what's implied there. And now she's just kind of troubled, and it was just like a little, like they kind of make it like a small little hiccup. It kind of really undoes a lot of potential that they had there with that. Yeah, and Dr. Loomis is hilarious in this movie. I don't know if this is in good taste to have him become this unhinged, but it's hard not to be a little bit amused at his rants at Jamie. And poor Danielle Harris, she must have went through the ringer because she really portrayed a lot of heavy emotions in this movie. And there's a part of me that feels like the emotions that she's playing are too heavy for a movie that's kind of this ridiculous, that the performance is that good.
Yeah.
And as far as Ellie goes, that's another thing I don't like about it. It is effective when she's killed because you don't expect it. It's effective because of the shock that it gives you. However, there's less people to root for, and I think that she's, like Will said, one of the better things about Halloween 4 was her as kind of a final girl. I feel like the movie is robbed of something once you take that element out. And
Yeah,
this one, it doesn't work for me. This is actually possibly my least favorite Halloween film, along with another one which we'll talk about later. It's just it takes all the goodwill that I liked about the fourth one, and I feel completely squanders it. Aside from Dr. Loomis and Jamie Lloyd's scenes together, which are obviously very amusing and entertaining, but after that, I don't feel like there's anything there. I think it's kind of bad. The story, the contrived, the way it works, this one does not work for me at all. What's
all
your
right.
take?
I think it's definitely the weakest of the Thorn trilogy. I'll say that. I think the cops that they add are just stupid and unfunny. They have those like really silly like clown noises that they have whenever they appear, like whack whack whack. Like it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like it belongs in a Halloween film. The ending shot where Michael's like sitting in his cell, like he's a teenager that got busted for like drunk driving, is so ridiculous, and it's so hilarious, and it really ruins a lot of what it sets up. But that being said, the Thorn trilogy are my favorite Halloween films, 4, 5, and 6, and this is probably my third favorite Halloween movie. And a big reason why I feel that way is the relationship between Loomis and Michael in this film. I think Halloween 5 has the most developed Michael-Loomis relationship. When when Michael's like stalking Loomis, and Loomis is saying, "You think that you can, if you kill her, you can stop the rage." Like, there's this odd level of like respect and even admiration that they have for each other in this film. There's a really great scene at the Myers house. There's a really great scene at the Myers house, and which looks nothing like the Myers house should look, but I digress. Where Loomis is talking to Michael and telling him that like he could have a fresh start if like he doesn't if he doesn't kill Jamie, and it almost looks like for a second, like just for like a second, that Michael's gonna like listen to Loomis and put down his knife. And this is of course before he like slashes him and throws him aside, but he doesn't kill him. And it would be very easy in this scene for him to just kill Loomis and move on. And I feel like that was a great moment humanizing Michael that didn't necessarily go overboard or like make him an anti-hero or something. He's still very much a villain. He's still very much this shape of evil, but he does have these little moments of nuance that could suggest something a bit more. And there's even a scene later on where this scene got a lot of mixed reception, and I can definitely see why. But there's a scene where he's talking with Jamie, and Jamie calls him uncle and asks to see his face, and she says, "Oh, you're just like me." And for a moment, Michael sheds a tear, and like you think that like maybe he can open up, but then once Jamie touches him, he just flinches back and reverts right back to being, the Michael that we all know and love. And I really appreciated that way, how they tried to, flesh out and humanize Michael a little bit more without going overboard like the Rob Zombie films do, and like extremely in your face that like, yes, he has this other side to him. It's done in much more subtle, smaller scenes. And I think that goes a long way in redeeming this film for me. And I know a lot of people hated Tina, and again, I can totally see why. She does play into the more goofy, over-the-top comedy elements of this film, which really do bring it down a lot. But I'm always fairly moved by her sacrifice that she has to save Jamie late in the film, because up until that point, she has been, this kind of annoying, over-the-top, goofy character. But like when she goes out of her way to do something that's selfless and give her own life for this child character who she doesn't know that well, that really struck a chord emotionally for me. So I do acknowledge the film definitely does have major flaws, but that being said, the stuff that it does right, I think it really does right, and it definitely is my third favorite in the series.
Okay. So I have something to counteract with you. Before this podcast started, I was telling Will that this franchise is kind of a thing where it's like pick your own, and we'll get more into that, but it's kind of like pick your own chronology and your own continuation. And the continuation of Michael that I like, I'm not particularly a big fan of him being humanized, but I do notice something. You're a fan of like the old Universal monster movies and more of that gothic horror, am I right, Will?
Yeah.
Okay. So I could definitely see what you mean. Like it's almost like
Listen to this
Frankenstein's
podcast,
monster, where he has
or I'll
moments
gut you.
that are like kind of human, where they humanize it, and I could see that appealing. But for me, that doesn't work for Michael Myers. And for my mileage, it doesn't work for me. Where I could see for some people that might be more satisfying, but I'm not sure if it needs to be harken back to that gothic style of horror where the monster always has to be some kind of human.
Yeah, there's a balance, to be sure, and like I said, I think Rob Zombie really went overboard with it in his Halloween movie in balancing Michael. But for me, what makes it work is that they aren't these huge moments that like we spend 10 to 20 minutes on. They are like these very small blink and you miss it teases.
Yeah, for me, it's definitely the weakest of the what you would call the Thorn trilogy.
The Thorn trilogy, yeah,
4 or 5.
Yeah, it's definitely the weakest of the Thorn trilogy. But there's a lot of stuff I do like about it, especially the Loomis Michael dynamic.
That is a very interesting point you bring up.
All right, so that was part 5, and then that moves us on to part 6, Halloween: The Curse of Michael Myers. This was in the 90s, right in the middle of the 90s, in 1995.
Can I say something about the title before you proceed? They were going to call it, they were thinking of titles, and The Curse of Michael Myers was actually a joke, how they have to keep making more of these movies. It was an executive joke that wasn't supposed to be serious until somebody said, hey, that actually works, so they actually kept it. So the title was not meant to be serious originally.
Okay. So this one was directed by Joe Chappelle, who directed this movie Phantoms with Ben Affleck, and then a bunch of TV after that. And you can tell this was directed by someone who done a bunch of TV.
He also did Hellraiser Bloodlines.
Oh, he did? I didn't see that.
I enjoyed that one a lot.
This one was the third film to kill the franchise. It had a $5 million budget and made $15 million worldwide. This one had Paul Rudd as Tommy Doyle. I'm a big Paul Rudd fan, but he was terrible in this. Donald Pleasance as Loomis is much more subdued in this. He's not the new Loomis that we love. He's older and more tempered. And bear with me, I probably have more to say on this than any other movie, but it's because I disliked it so much.
Interesting.
I also I have more to say in the opposite direction.
Okay. And it's not my least favorite, but I have more to say about it than any of the others because it's so savagely bad. So
is this the theatrical cut or the producer's cut we're talking about? I think we should make a distinction because
yeah, the theatrical
very different.
cut. I wanted to watch the producer's cut, but it wasn't available, so I did watch the original theatrical cut.
And
so
we'll elaborate on that more after.
It opens up with the words, "Michael, please don't hurt me," and then you have images puked up on the screen with the most amateur editing of the entire franchise. You have throughout the movie, there's several fades to black, like there's a commercial break. And it was just in the first few minutes, it was already amateurish and annoying to me. And then when Paul Rudd comes in with the voiceover where it sounds like he's doing an impersonation of Loomis, I laughed out loud every time he went into that silly voice. And then Paul Rudd calls into the radio show, this radio show that plays all over town inexplicably. It plays throughout the movie, and everywhere you go in town, it's being played, even at the bus station. So he has this Loomis impersonation, and he also talks in the same type of mannerisms as Loomis. So he says the same type of things. And I honestly thought he was joking. I honestly thought he was calling in a radio prank. But there was a head on the...
Paul Rudd ageless, though?
Huh?
Isn't Paul Rudd ageless, though?
Yeah. By the way, he was 25 in this, and he still looks the same 25 years later. But it was some great kills with the head on the spike, and then the head twist. That was one of the best kills. But it's a lame remake of the music of the Halloween theme. It was an overall poorly done score from beginning to end. As I said, the lame radio show. And then Michael Myers is reduced to a goon for a cult. There's no mystery, no suspense, no gravitas, way too many jump scares with loud music on every single one. The pacing is clunky. It goes from slow to fast, slow to fast. It's clunky throughout. And then Paul Rudd returns to his silly voice every time he's explaining anything about Michael Myers. He returns to his Loomis impersonation. A lame protest side story where people are protesting Halloween being messed up in Haddonfield. And then they almost have a good scene where blood is dripping down in this girl because somebody's hanging from a tree. And she said, "Mommy, it's raining red." And even it's turned lame by amateur editing. And then there's a really bad moment when there's missing time when the cult attacks. The cult attacks, and you have Loomis and Tommy Doyle. And then all of a sudden, it cuts to the next scene, and Loomis and Tommy say that they were drugged, but we never saw anything happen to them. There was a completely missed opportunity of having something happen in that scene, but nothing happened. And all of a sudden, you skip to later on in time when they start talking about when they were drugged, but you saw nothing. So then you get to the end, and it's Michael Myers versus Tommy. And the score gets even worse. It sounds like a metal score with like a drum solo going on in the background. It was horrendous. And then the editing goes black right in the middle of the action. It's the middle of the climax. And it doesn't even go from one room to the other. It's in the middle of the action. It goes black like there's a commercial break, and then comes back on in the middle of the fight. And then at the end, you get Tommy Doyle beating the shit out of Michael Myers with a pipe, right? Mm-hmm. And then what was up with him beating the shit out of Michael Myers and then standing there and smiling at him? With that cheesy Paul Rudd smile. I'm like, what the hell is that? And then, to make it all worse, the screen pushes up and kind of squishes the screen, and the credits start rolling at the bottom while the movie's still going on.
Okay, really
and
quick,
then,
just Michael, just so you're aware, the only reason that happens is because we watched it with an AMC app, and that's how they truncated it. That's not how the movie actually is.
Oh, okay.
just to let you know, that's the fault of AMC's broadcast of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I was about to say, I don't remember this.
Yeah.
So even if they didn't do that, even if they didn't push the screen up for the credits to run, there was still like in the middle of the action, you're waiting for a climax, and then it just pans to the mask on the ground. Then you hear Loomis screaming. Then it pans to a jack-o'-lantern, and then the end. One of the worst endings of the franchise. It was horrible, and that's my dissertation on Halloween.
All right, let's hear Will, because we know it's going to be
all right.
the exact opposite direction.
This is my favorite Halloween film. I honestly, I think it's the best one, and this is, I'll tell you why. I'll try to counter where I can. The editing, I can understand where it threw people off, but the editing and the directing of this reminded me of, it brought me back to like a 90s strobe lit haunted house, like the kind that I used to go to as a kid all the time growing up. And I feel like the main goal of a Halloween film should be to capture those nostalgic feelings of childhood, of childhood Halloween, when the world still had some kind of black magic in it. And I totally get that vibe from Halloween 6. Like, it's a heavy use of strobe lights, revealing like all these horrific images. I think it really does capture that sort of small child in a haunted house aesthetic. The blue lighting is the blue lighting and orange lighting, I think, is gorgeous. It again, it really does capture that nostalgic Halloween vibe. Paul Rudd's performance, I personally love. I think that it reminded me of like an old Hammer horror kind of performance, like something that you'd see from like a young, I guess Cushing or Lee or one of those kind of actors.
Christopher Lee,
And
something like that.
yeah, Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and those kind of actors. And like I hadn't really seen something like that from an actor so young, and that may have been why it like came across weird, because like most of the time when you see actors like play these kind of characters, they're usually middle-aged folks around that age, and this was Paul Rudd's first movie role. So I can see why it wouldn't work for some people. For me, it really added to the atmosphere of the film. I love the characters in this film. I think Kara Strode is the most interesting final girl in this series. She's a single mom from a broken home who I personally saw as coded to be lesbian to a degree. I'd like if you see her dynamic with if you see her dynamic with Tommy, and like, you know, how her father treats her and dismisses her, I sort of got like a sort of queer vibe from her, which I thought was very interesting.
Now that I'm thinking back, I never noticed it before. I think that's probably true upon reflection.
Yeah.
If it were made today, it probably would have been more blunt about what was going on. But and for a 90s slasher to do that, in the upbringing that she had, and with the subtlety that was presented, I thought was genius and very new for the time. The kills in this film are terrifying. Michael is the most sadistic and just evil he has ever been. Jamie's death in this is just heart-wrenching to watch. When she gets impaled onto the spin drill, and she outstretches her hands, like basically begging for mercy, begging for Michael to let her go. And Michael outstretches his own hands, like it looks at first like maybe he's gonna help her, maybe he's gonna like pull her out of this and show some sympathy. And he pushes her even farther on the spin drill, and then turns the spin drill on, draining the life out of her. It's just such a heart-sinking moment of horror for me. I know people had a problem with the cult subplot, and they're like, oh, Michael was controlled by a cult. I feel like this film completely debunks this theory by the end, because they have the scene with the doctors where, like, you know, they're performing on, they're about to like have the procedure to like, you know, extract what makes Michael so powerful. Michael comes into the hospital room, butchers absolutely everyone. The Cult of Thorn in the theatrical cut of Halloween 6 were basically only pointing Michael in the right direction, and they were lucky enough to get out of his way. When they thought that they had control and that like Michael was doing their bidding, Michael completely wipes them out. And that's something that Tommy even foreshadows in the monologue at the start, where he says, you can't control evil. You can lock it and bury it and pray that it dies, but it never will. I thought that was a really good foreshadowing to that. The chase scene after the hospital massacre, which is probably one of my maybe my favorite scene in the entire franchise, with like the wailing, shrieking musical score. It just has this very trippy, psychedelic nightmare quality, but the way that it leads into the chase scene, again, I think it really helps the haunted house vibe, as like they're running through the basement of the hospital, which is just lit up with these fluorescent reds and blues.
Listen to this
so
podcast,
vibrant,
or I'll gut you.
There's so much life to it. I know you weren't big on the part where Paul Rudd beats Michael with a pipe, but I mean he did trank him like 5-10 times. Like he hits him with like a ton of tranquilizers. So I thought that was like, you know, just I could buy him temporarily immobilizing him for that. The scene where it cuts to the pumpkin and then it blows out just has such a simple Halloween vibe for me. Every single time I watch Halloween 6 and I get to that moment, and the film ends and gets into the Brother Kane song and Full Shine On. It just fills me with such a feeling of Halloween and fall and just it's just such an iconic image for me. I really like the protest subplot. I liked how they sort of like pushed a little bit of social commentary in there with, you know, the Barry Sims character. Originally, he was actually going to be what's that one radio host who was like really popular in the 90s? I'm forgetting his name.
I'm trying to think, like Rick Dees or
the white guy with the afro. I'm forgetting his name. It's right on the tip of my tongue.
Stephen Wright? I don't know.
He was like a judge on American Idol at one point. Crap. Or America's Got Talent or something.
It's not ringing.
It's right on the tip of my tongue too.
I think I know who you guys are talking about, but it's not ringing a bell for me. Yeah.
But I feel like I think that visually the film was just an absolute feast. I love the kills. I love the sound design. I love the characters. I love pretty much everything about this movie. And it's actually the only one that I own on DVD currently.
Interesting. So I have a question. This is in regards to Paul Rudd's performance for you, Will. You don't think that the accent that he adopts, that slightly rural accent that he takes on, is it me or is it just like a here and gone accent that only gets activated when he's talking about Michael Myers and then he sounds like a normal person when he's not? You don't think that's an inconsistency in the performance?
I mean, he always sounds like a little just sort of weird and awkward and on edge. I mean, even when he's talking to I think there's a really funny scene, and admittedly it's a little bit awkward and clunky, but it's when it's when Kara like walks in on him hanging out with Danny, and he's like, "I'm your neighbor from across the street, Tommy Doyle," and you can still kind of hear it there. I think it's a little bit more intense when he's talking about Michael because this is such a major figure in his life, just this figure of enormous trauma. But I saw it pretty consistently throughout his whole performance, and that brings me back to that little smile that he had at the end. I actually liked that touch because I felt like it was such a powerful moment for him, where it's like he's completely conquered his childhood demon, and so like it makes sense that he'll have this sort of
Smirk.
this spark, this minor self-congratulatory moment. Halloween 6 is a wicked dark film. The kills are very sadistic and brutal. I mean, the characters, even when they're not suffering from being chased by Michael, are ones who have gone through a lot in life. And I feel like that was just sort of like a nice little moment of levity in the whole thing.
So I'm somewhere in between. I actually was along for the ride for, I wouldn't say the whole first half, but a first good chunk of the movie. I get where you're coming from, Michael, when you said it seems weird that this radio station is just playing everywhere at any time. I totally agree with that, but okay, I'm willing to suspend my disbelief for this a little bit. I like the opening scene. I agree with Will about Jamie Lloyd's death. I think that's probably one of the most brutal deaths in the entire movie is when he pushes Jamie back further and then turns it on so it starts spinning. Paul Rudd, I don't know what it was about him. I actually think that this performance in this movie is kind of questionable. For me, the inconsistent accent really doesn't work. It's like here and gone, and it's occasionally too smirky. But there's this weird thing about it, and I think it's just because it's Paul Rudd. He has a certain type of charisma to him or he seems like he was meant to be on screen or he was meant to become an actor. So for some reason, despite the fact that I don't think this is a particularly good performance, I found him kind of endearing for some reason. I felt like there was some kind of presence or some kind of likability. Chalk that up to what you will. I don't think it's a good performance, but I think it's enjoyable. I think at somewhere around the halfway point, this movie starts to feel lightweight for me, where I guess I could see what you mean, where it gets a little bit darker, but it starts to feel very routine by the ending, where nothing feels a little bit scary. It feels like we're going through the motions after a while. And I didn't really like that slow motion kill from across the street. That just does not work for me at all. And I have this weird thing. I actually think the first half of this movie has some interesting or cool death scenes, and the last part of it is strangely forgettable in that aspect, where
Even the hospital massacre? You didn't like that one?
it was okay. I don't know. It was just, it felt like it was building up to something more. It's just the second half of this movie really deflated it for me. I didn't like the monster battle at the end of it all. It just seemed kind of strange. I don't really understand what's going back in the ending. It seems like Dr. Loomis is going back to like kill himself with Michael or something, but is he fighting him? The mask's on the ground, and then we hear the scream.
I thought Michael like snuck up on him. That's what that and just killed him from behind. That was sort of what I assumed. But
See, I don't know if I picked up on that aspect, and it's just after a while it just seemed kind of like cheesy for me. I do like the relationship between the father and the daughter, and I thought it was pretty interesting that they would put a father like this in the movie, where he's obviously a very fucked up person, to be really blunt.
Yeah.
He treats his family, the way that he treats his daughter, and I know people like this exist. I thought that was actually a pretty good attempt to do a father like that. I don't think you really see that many fathers that behave that way in slasher movies. So there's a certain level of realism, and I totally get what you mean by finding the final girl to be relatable, and I like her story. I like that she's struggling. I just feel that all of that stuff could have been taken to a much better end by the end of the movie. Like, it doesn't fulfill its potential to me. It's not as bad as the fifth one is, in my opinion, but it's not as good as part 4 either. It's just somewhere in between, where I kind of like a lot of what I've seen and I'm going along, but some of it is really hard to care about. It has such a lightweight quality to it that it feels like some of it barely even registers while I'm watching it. We're never bored while I was watching it, but for a while I just felt nothing, no intensity, no scares. It just started to feel like an empty experience by the time the movie was over.
yeah.
And I do agree.
I was just gonna say one more thing just about the Cult of Thorn that I forgot to bring up. This might get me into some hot water, but I actually like overall. I think the Cult of Thorn might be scarier to me, and at least conceptually a better antagonist than Michael is. And the reason why I say that is because Michael, at the end of the day, he's one person with a mask killing people with a knife, and yeah, that's scary, but you can prepare for that. You can you know what to expect from that. With the Cult of Thorn, it's made up of neighbors, friends, strangers, and they've taken over an entire town. You literally can't trust anyone, and you basically can't escape them. And I think it also does a really good job of tying Myers' origin back to Halloween and Sam Hain without going overboard. I've heard people say that it explains too much, it gives too many answers, but I would disagree there too. I think that it only gives vague answers, and there's still some very interesting, creepy questions to ponder. Is Thorn a biological condition? Is it like an actual curse? Was the cult completely wrong since they did end up getting wiped out anyway? I think that it still does leave a lot of mystery and suspense there, but it dips a lot more into the supernatural side of Sam Hain and Halloween, and I really appreciate that.
See, I get why you would appreciate that, but for me, by the time we reach this one, we've gotten very, very, very far from what the original idea of Halloween was, the idea of the boogeyman existing, where this explanation, I could see like why it might work for you, but for my taste, it's a little bit too convoluted, and it kind of makes Michael seem less of a threat, that there's a whole cult behind him, though. That's what I think of it, though.
And I do agree that especially a few scenes in this movie, it's a pretty mean movie. Like, yeah. Especially the Jamie Lloyd death. I did feel that one. It was really mean and felt evil. And then with the dad being such a piece of shit, so it made his kill more satisfying because you wanted to see that asshole be killed.
Yep.
But it's also very bold, and that's why I see why Will and I have such opposite opinions of it. Because all the ways that it went really out there, really went for it with something different, just completely turned me off. But this is a perfect example of somebody appreciating those twists and appreciating the boldness of it, and it connected with them. So, you know, I do see some of the merit of it. It just, everything that was bold about it just fell flat for me. And I must admit that I might be a little biased with Paul Rudd, because you're so used to seeing him as this sarcastic, this lovable, sarcastic character, and you expect everything he says to be a yuck kind of sarcastic joke. So that could have contributed to me not taking him seriously as Tommy Doyle. But I just couldn't get over that Loomis impersonation he did every time he talked about Michael.
You both bring up some very interesting, fascinating points on this one.
Thank you.
It's definitely a life so far.
I must say, Will, you're very good at explaining your opinions, even if I don't agree with them. You make a lot of sense for sure.
I agree. You make a lot of sense too.
Perfect. So now it's time for the franchise to get a reset, isn't it, Michael?
Yeah, this one came in 1998. Halloween H2O, 20 years later, which my daughter talked about this on the Horror for Kids segment on our show, our variety show. And like she said, just from the title, it's already ridiculous, because it's Halloween, and then H2O stands for Halloween 20 years, and then it says 20 years later. So even the title is redundant.
It's Halloween 20 years later. That is the title of the movie.
So this one's directed by Steve Miner, who also directed Friday the 13th 2 and 3. House with William Katz was a really good movie. Warlock, Lake Placid, so he's a good director. And then the co-writer is Matt Greenberg, who wrote 1408, which is one of my favorite Stephen King adaptations. And this one was successful. And this one is where we veered away from the timeline. And this is as if 4 and 5
Listen to
never
this
happened.
podcast,
4 or 5.
or I'll gut you.
This one had
4 through 6,
4 through 6. And then a $17 million budget, and it made $55 million at the box office, this was the most successful one since the first one. But it's a cheesy, bloated teen scream, but it definitely has some decent kills and some okay scenes that are effective, but just not overall. It's one of the worst masks of the whole franchise, especially the CG mask.
Oh yeah.
And it just doesn't feel like a worthwhile entry to me, even though it does have some redeeming qualities to it. It just seemed overall cheesy teen scream for me.
So this is going to sound strange. This movie, to me, H2O, comes across as glorified fan fiction. Like if a fan came up and decided to come up with a story. Having said that, I actually think it's relatively well executed fan fiction upon a rewatch. I actually like the look of the movie. I think the movie is really well shot, and I didn't remember that from the last time, but I think the opening sequence, the filming, I could get the sense that Steve Miner was trying to get a feel of the elegance of the original. I think that some of the chase scenes are effective. LL Cool J does not work as some aspiring writer trying to write romance thriller novels, which is kind of dumb. I think Jamie Lee Curtis is good in this. It's weird having Josh Hartnett in this. This is I guess this was his breakout movie. So I think a lot of the kill scenes are actually pretty effective, and I actually think that this is a good slasher movie, but there's something about it that just does not feel like Halloween. I cannot place my finger on it. It seems like a piece of fan fiction at the end of the day. Well executed, well directed, good kill scenes and everything, but still fan fiction. What about you, Will?
I just find this film completely boring and forgettable.
Okay. Right.
It's like I don't even really get enjoyment out of it from like a cheesy factor. It's just so I feel nothing watching it. The first 2 acts focuses on Josh Hartnett, and then it like immediately switches to being all about Laurie, and it feels incredibly jarring, and it doesn't flow well at all. There's really long stretches of like nothing happening in this film. I can see why some people might find it atmospheric, but I just found it just very dull, and the comedy bits, while some of them were funny, I don't think I think really took away from what little genuine horror atmosphere I felt from this. The guy that they picked to play Michael, I don't know who it was, but I cannot think of a worse actor to play Michael in any of the films. I was never scared of him. Every time I saw him with that stupid mask, which I agree is probably the worst in any of the films, I laughed. I thought he looked like a tool in a Halloween costume. That's the best way I can describe him. And like a spirit Halloween costume, like not Halloween John Carpenter.
It's weird. I have this weird thing with this movie where even though I like it, I don't have anything to argue with either of your points and why you dislike it. It all makes sense to me, but for some reason, it kind of worked for me on a rewatch. I don't know why that is, but I think it's a fairly effective movie, but something about it feels fake.
Yeah, I don't have any like it's not a complete catastrophic failure in any way. Well, maybe Michael himself, but apart from like the actor in the mask for Michael, like it's not particularly horrible in any way, but it's just so dull and boring to me. This to me might be the most boring Halloween film. I just watch it and I feel nothing at any moment. You really this is the first film without Donald Pleasence's Sam Loomis in it, and you can really feel that. Like it just doesn't feel the same. And I think that might be why you came out of it with it feeling fake. And I think that for Michael, I think that might be why you ended up finding it like a cheesy teen scream, because Loomis was a figure that really grounded the Halloween films in a place of authenticity and respectability. And when he's not there anymore, it just doesn't feel like Halloween. It feels like another slasher. And if you put that on top of a film that I already find very unmemorable and very dull, and it's just nothing really registers for me. It's just a nothing film for me.
Here's another thing. I think I know why it registers as a teen scream for Michael. This is Dimension Studios, and this is they had already had, I think, the rights to it since The Curse of Michael Myers, I believe.
Yeah,
this was the Curse of Michael Myers, and this is a very strange choice. Did you notice that they're using music from Scream in this one?
Oh, I didn't notice.
Yeah, they were
from the Scream movies that's playing. And then they have them watching Scream 2 on television. And I think that's a really weird choice, because in those movies, if those movies existed, the original Scream references Halloween and Jamie Lee Curtis and Michael Myers so much, so far as having the characters actually watching the movie and responding to it. So it's like significant chunks of scenes of Halloween are seen in Scream. So I'm not really sure how that timeline actually squares or works out where those movies exist, but Michael Myers real. I'm not a big fan when they try to...
Maybe it's like a Last Action Hero thing. Like I don't know. It's like they call him like a different name or something, a different actor.
I feel like they're trying to they were trying to capitalize off of the success of Scream, which was also Dimension Studios a couple years earlier, and that's the movie that gets kind of credited with like revitalizing the slasher film, at least for a while. But there's I think while discussing it, I think it became clear to me a lot of why it seems fake. There's too much Scream in this movie and not enough Halloween, and you could tell that the Weinsteins were trying to replicate that type of success with an older franchise. And I believe Kevin Williamson, even though he's not credited in this movie as like the story, I believe he did make contributions to the story, if I'm not mistaken, even though it's credited to somebody else.
Okay.
But yeah, Halloween H2O.
So that brings us to 2002, which Halloween Resurrection, the Busta Rhymes Halloween.
Oh, here we go.
That's a great lead-in, the Busta Rhymes Halloween. I like that.
And this one's directed by Rick Rosenthal, who directed Halloween 2, and it's a continuation of H2O. This one had a $15 million budget and made $37.6 million. So we're talking about bigger numbers here, both in the budget and in the grosses, but it just seems to get worse and worse. Like just the fact that Laurie cut off the wrong head in H2O, and that's why Mike Myers is still alive in this one. Come on. And what about the mask, dude? In this one, Michael Myers' eyebrows are on fleek. His eyebrows are too much. Laurie is a smart character. Laurie Strode is killed in the opening scene because she's stupid, because she wants to check under the mask.
You know what
And
the
then-
best, you know what the, don't you think her line reading is over the top where she gets stabbed and he's like, I'll see you in hell, Michael, and then she kisses
Yeah.
the walls. I was like, that just feels all
God,
wrong.
it was so cheesy.
And that's probably the best part of the movie.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the best part.
The best part of the movie was even really bad. And then the preparation into the whole premise where Busta Rhymes is like a internet personality who brings all these people.
Dangertainment.
Dangertainment.
Yeah,
Yeah, like that. Dangertainment.
brings all these people into the Michael Myers house, and he starts killing them one by one. And then it's loud jump scare music just over and over. And then fake Michael Myers running around in the house, and you don't know which one's which. Just people running around the house getting killed. I didn't give a shit about this one. I even stopped taking notes about halfway through. I was like, this isn't even worth discussing. It gets so monotonous and so uninteresting. And I was more entertained by 6, even though I didn't like it. There was so much that I didn't like about 6. It was just so bold that you couldn't help but be interested in it, even if you didn't like the different bold aspects of it. But there was nothing even bold about this one. It was just going through the motions again and again. I got so sick of it about halfway through, and I just kind of sat there not really paying attention to it through the last half.
I think we might all have disagreements about what our least favorite Halloween movie is, but whether or not this comes at the bottom, I think we can reach
It's the worst.
consensus. It's the stupidest one in the series by
I would say it's the stupidest and the worst. And like, I hate this one even more than 3, and that is a feat. That is a major feat. And the reason I hate this one more is because I feel like a lot of the ideas have potential, but they're executed in just the worst way possible. I think the found footage angle would be a really great way to, like, to capitalize on the Halloween atmosphere that's synonymous with this franchise. I think it'd be a great way to have some fresh scares. But instead, it's like this stupid half and half thing that just doesn't work, and it doesn't feel cohesive at all. And the found footage stuff is shot horribly, acted inauthentically. This is one of the worst acted films I've ever seen in my life. Busta Rhymes is funny, but he only does funny things every now and then. I was saying this earlier to James. It's like watching the Super Bowl between 2 teams you don't give a fuck about. It's the best part of it is like the little commercial breaks of Busta Rhymes in the Michael Myers mask going, "Oh, I'm Michael Myers. He's a killer shark in baggy ass overalls." But then you have to sit through 20, 30 minutes of really boring, dragged out bullshit that you don't give a fuck about. Really, really embarrassing. A waste of ideas, a waste of time, a waste of Busta Rhymes and Tyra Banks' talents. Just a waste. A waste.
Okay, there's some stuff in here that's perversely amusing in it, only because it's stupidity. One, when Busta Rhymes is berating Michael, I remember my dad took me to see this as a kid when I had lower standards, and even as a kid, I knew that was stupid. Busta Rhymes, they set up this thing where he's watching karate movies and getting all into it, and then he's performing kung fu kicks on Michael Myers. So bad. What the fuck is going on? And he tells him, "You want to be on Dangertainment?" He says something stupid about Dangertainment and all these clips, and it's just, my lord, what is with this movie? And then, of course, everybody's favorite part, everybody's favorite line, when Busta Rhymes comes in, kicks in the door to save the day, it's "Trick or treat, motherfucker."
Yeah.
This whole movie is just completely dumb, but I have to admit, even though it's bad, and there are parts of it, sections that are really dull with no interesting characters, it had me at the dumbest parts. I was actually literally rolling over in laughter, whether anything to do with Busta Rhymes and his speeches and the way he talks to himself. That stupid ass scene where Tyra Banks is dancing around while the camera guy is getting killed is so so bad. And then she turns and
Listen to this
that's a good
podcast,
angle. You go, boy.
or I'll
I have to
gut
wonder,
you.
is like, are they trying to make this a joke? Or is like, we're like, I don't know what was going through the heads of the people who actually put this movie together. I'm like, this can't be serious. This has to be a put on somehow. the level of idiocy that goes into the storyline and the dialogue is just, it's just bad. But
Yeah.
there are some things I enjoy about it in an ironic way, I guess, but it's pretty terrible. It's a bad movie. I think that's
So this was in 2002. So for good reason, nobody touched the franchise until 2007 with Rob Zombie's Halloween, and he completely reinvented it. It had a $15 million budget and made $77.5 million worldwide. We're gonna skip ahead to 2018 just for now because I might have to leave early because I might have a big opportunity with my feature film, and I have to talk to some people about it at 4:30. So I might have to bail early. So I'll just say that Rob Zombie's Halloween in 2007 was successful, and then Halloween 2 is still successful, but not as successful. $15 million budget again with $38.5 million return worldwide. So that brings us to 2018 when David Gordon Green, I guess he didn't like the way the franchise had been handled overall. So as he was the director and co-writer, and then he co-wrote it with Danny McBride. And the composers were once again John Carpenter with his son Cody and Daniel Davies. And this one is as if 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, H2O, and Resurrection never happened. It had a $10 million budget, which to me it looks like a bigger budget. It looks like a bigger budget than the others that were much worse films. And it made a whopping $255 million worldwide. I thought it was a great backstory of Laurie Strode and her family. I think it was extremely well told with good writing, good characters, great suspense, great score from John Carpenter and his son. It dismisses the Laurie sister, Laurie being the sister storyline, which I liked. Laurie gets crazier because Michael is getting out. And I thought that was very entertaining, where they already have this dissension in the family with her daughter being taken away from her when she was young because she was so obsessed with preparing for Michael. And then when he's finally going to start getting out, she kind of stirs everything up again. She starts going like Loomis type of crazy on everybody. So it causes more of a rift. But it has a great mixture of kills, which is kills on camera, kills off camera, showing the aftermath of kills. Great variety. I love the bathroom scene with Michael dropping the teeth from the person he just killed onto the floor of the stall. Michael Myers in the little boy's closet scene. That was awesome. I thought it was surprising as hell because it seemed it seemed like it was going to be a fake out scare. Like it was making you think Michael Myers was in the closet, but he actually wasn't going to be. And when she opens it, he's just standing there. That scared the shit out of me.
Okay, so and before Will gets his shots in, because I know he's not a fan of this one, I just wanted to say this is my sequel, like the sequel that like actually for the first time actually got what I loved about the original Halloween. So from my perspective, this is the Halloween sequel that I had always wanted to see for so many years and I'd never gotten. And I'm going to start off with the opening scene. The opening scene where the two podcasters visit the hospital. They're meeting Michael's new doctor, talking about him, and they go out into the open where everybody's kind of like in their own squares, and he produces the mask. And the way that the mental patients kind of react to it, and Michael's indifference and the one he's holding it up, that scene, watching it again for I think the fourth time, actually gave me chills this time, where I started to feel like, holy shit, that is Michael Myers, the boogeyman, the presence of pure evil. So I like that this movie kind of got rid of all the clutter, the stuff that I'm not a fan of, and brought it back to what I liked about Michael Myers, a simple boogeyman. And I actually do think that, and I know that you're going to get to this, is that there's a good reason for Michael to be after Laurie Strode still, even though, I mean, she's not his sister anymore. It's also because in this version of Michael Myers is pure evil. However, he only killed his sister when he was 6 years old and 4 people when he escaped later and then was locked back up. by the standards of and they even point this out in the movie, that doesn't seem like such a big deal when you think about it. But as soon as he gets out, you could see that this is part of who he always was when he gets out. It's almost kind of interrupted the idea that all he did was take like a 40-year break. And I think that Michael's possible rage in this one is palpable because he's theatrical like he is in the first one, in terms of like, you know how in the original he had, what was it, the sheet over his body where he's almost playing a prank. He does things like that, like dropping the teeth in, except it's a little bit more brutal and a little bit more, I guess, up to today's standards, because I don't think the kills in the first one would cut it for a modern day audience in terms of slasher scenes. So I think it has the best kills, but it makes sense why, getting back to that, he would be after Laurie, because he only killed so many people, and that was his target in the first one. It was totally random. She dropped the keys off at the house, and in the original one, she walks off and she sings that song, I wish I had you all alone, just the two of us. I'm a terrible singer, sorry. And Michael's kind of watching her, and I get this feeling that once Michael fixes his sights on you, he has to go through with his mission until he's done. And since Laurie got away 40 years ago when he was after her, it seems like he has to go back in and finish the job, because he is just completely driven by nothing but pure evil. And I don't think once he marks you as a victim, you are always going to be, in his head, a victim until somebody dies. I think that this is a better look at trauma than Halloween H2O. I thought it was a very believable version of Laurie Strode, how this night would have traumatized her and kind of affected her life, and how it kind of caused generational trauma with her daughter and her granddaughter. I totally believed her. I think Jamie Lee Curtis did a great job in being a much older but more weathered version of that character who spent her whole life preparing. And I think there's a little bit of sadness in it, because even though Michael didn't really kill Laurie at the end of Halloween, he basically killed her inability to have a normal functioning existence, to have a normal life. She killed her ability to have healthy relationships with her mother, with her daughter and her granddaughter. And that is, in effect, kind of just as bad as killing somebody, when you kill their entire reason and their entire joy behind living. So I really like that aspect of it. I like all of the kill scenes, whether they're shown on screen or not. I think all of it was effective. There are a couple of callbacks to the original one that are a little questionable in here, especially having Jamie Lee Curtis substitute for Michael in certain parts, like when she's standing outside the school, or when she's falls off the roof and then she disappears, just like Michael does at the end of the first one. The way she appears in the back towards the end of the movie, where her face kind of materializes out of the black. Yeah. It's like reversing the scene in the original Halloween where she was the one standing by the door, and then you see Michael's face go in. So I think those are fan moments that, as in a big audience, they kind of work because they're callbacks, but I think those are like some of the most questionable things about the movie, is the explicit callbacks. And I think at the end, the movie loses just a little bit of steam that it had built up. But for my taste, I thought it was a superb slasher movie and a believable continuation of the original Halloween. And that's my rant.
But I just want to say real quick that I think one of the scariest things about the Michael Myers character is that he lies in wait. Mm-hmm. Patiently lies in wait. And it's happened several times on a small scale, and then on the larger scale of him just sitting there quiet for 40 years. And then it speaks to how a little bit unhinged Laurie Strode became. Mm-hmm. Like when she says very convincingly, I pray every night for him to escape. And then the sheriff's like, that's a dumb thing to pray for. I love that scene. And then I like how that crazy doctor talks about the psychology of the victim instead of the psychology of the killer, like Loomis did. I thought it was a good twist on the original story. I love the motion sensor scene in the backyard. I thought it was very scary, where the light goes off and I think one of the greatest tools to use in a horror film is darkness, and I thought that scene did it to perfection. And then when the doctor goes crazy and stabs the sheriff, I can see how a lot of people were turned off by that, and that was the only thing that seemed kind of off when I first watched it. But on a rewatch, where it seemed to come a bit out of nowhere in the first watch, when I watched it again, it's easy to see that doctor is going toward he's going to snap, and he's got a little bit too much of a fascination with Michael Myers. One of my favorite scenes is the granddaughter in the back of the cop car. The doctor has gone crazy. You know he's not going to let her out. She's stuck in that back seat with an unconscious Michael Myers. The tension is over the top. It's palpable, and it's just thick, and it scared the shit out of me. And then you go to the awesome and exciting final fight between Laurie Strode and Michael Myers. I thought it was extremely entertaining. It was realistic, and it felt like a harrowing type of experience. And then I loved it, all of it, where Laurie is the aggressor now, because they set up it. It's not like it didn't, especially on a rewatch, it didn't come across as much of a fan service to me this time, because they lay the groundwork through the whole thing that she's the aggressor on this one, and she's not just a hapless victim that's waiting for Michael Myers to come get her. She wants him. And I think they do very well at convincing the viewer of that. And then that leads to my favorite scene of the whole movie, when Laurie Strode's daughter tricks Michael into thinking that she's weak when she's down in the bunker. I think that's the best scene of the movie, and I love the whole climax.
I do think some of this movie is kind of empowering too, because it's about obviously it's about trauma, survival trauma, and obviously it's affected them in negative ways, particularly Laurie and her inability to function in life. But there is something kind of empowering about seeing somebody who has been a victim for so long finally stand up to their bully, or finally stand up to their aggressor, and find the courage within them, as opposed to Laurie, who didn't know how to respond to him in the original one, so she just goes screaming from him, trying to protect him. The way that she's kind of prepared this time, I think, is a powerful story of a victim, taking taking agency back in their life, and not letting that big bully or that big specter drag them down. So I do think that aspect was kind of empowering, and I like that they did it on a multi-generational level as well. So let's hear what you have to say about it, Will, because I know you're not in agreement with us on this.
I definitely see your points, and I think that there is a lot to gain from this movie, but I just had way too many issues with it. To me, the best way I can describe it is this film is, to me, what
Listen to
The
this
Last
podcast,
Jedi
or I'll
is
gut you.
to like hardcore, the old Star Wars fans and stuff. First of all, I didn't like the look of the film. I felt like it was way too underlit a lot of the time. I feel like there just wasn't a lot of color in the film. Like, so much of the film is just very dark brown, and like it lacked a certain amount of atmosphere for me, which I really didn't like. I think there was way too much comedy for a story as ambitious and serious as this, and for a revival of such an iconic franchise. I think that it really should have stuck to a more dark and serious tone. The stuff with the I think the stuff with the dad, and I thought was just really cheesy and dumb. Like, oh, I got peanut butter on my penis. It was just like, I found it really grating.
But there are dads who are like that are kind of corny, who have like that cheesy sense of humor.
Yeah, but I just I just thought that I just didn't think that it really worked for this movie. And the best friends that the granddaughter had, that was like, oh, when am I gonna get a girl? Then Michael sneaks up on him and doesn't kill him right away. I thought that was really silly, and
I thought that scene was scary.
I don't know. I thought that I didn't like the comedy leading into it. It felt very Scream-ish, which normally would be a good thing because I love Scream, but I didn't think that. I think for this film, that tone does not work for Halloween for me. I thought the whole reporter angle was just a major waste of time. It spends a really long time on those reporters in the start, and then it just completely drops them and then switches to Laurie, which I didn't really enjoy. I didn't like how the film went out of its way to like really to just spell things out to the audience regarding Michael. It tries to do what the original did with Loomis, where he had like these huge gravitas speeches about how Michael is pure evil with Jamie Lee Curtis. And for me personally, I don't think Jamie Lee Curtis has that gravitas to pull it up, to pull that off. It doesn't mean she's not a great actress, but that's just a very unique quality in Donald Pleasance that I don't personally see in Jamie Lee Curtis. When she was saying these lines, they didn't feel ominous or foreboding to me. They just felt like generic, spooky lines that were just sort of like telling the audience what to feel rather than making me feel that.
Can I counter that one point really quick, Will? I kind of get what you mean, but the impression that I got off of her line readings in this one, like I do understand what you mean. It's not ominous. There's almost like a resigned quality to it, like a dejected, almost like she's so mentally prepared for this after so many years that she's kind of numbed herself a little bit to the idea. So that's more of the impression that I get off of it, more than her trying to be creepy or ominous. It's that she's had enough. She doesn't really have, I mean, she's a very strong person, but a lot of her I guess the softer parts of humanity have been kind of leached out of her. And to me, what I hear is somebody who is kind of resigned themselves to just accept that this is what Michael is and that's that. I don't think it's not like Dr. Sam Loomis, but I don't think they're trying to push it in that direction. I don't think anybody could take Donald Pleasance's place in that regard, and I don't get the impression that they're trying to with this one.
Yeah, I can get that. That was just my impression, and maybe that is just a part of me where it's just like I really do miss Loomis and all of the Halloween films since. Like I've just really felt his absence, and maybe that's just like an essential part of Halloween for me that I guess can't really be replaced, unfortunately. I also wasn't really big on the mental asylum scene in the start where it's like all the prisoners were laughing and stuff. I get why people would find it creepy. A lot of people I know found it terrifying. I just found it just very cheesy and just overdone. It felt very much like a hallmark of these kind of movies from the 70s and 80s. So if you grew up on that kind of preferring that kind of horror, I could definitely see why it would why people would appreciate that. But for me, it just really fell flat, and I was just like, what? It didn't really work for me. The climax, I think in theory it could have worked, but I just felt like most of it was just very underlit, and like I couldn't really see what was going on the first time I saw the film. On rewatch, I could like see a little bit clearer, but it felt very underlit for how big of a moment it was supposed to be. I can definitely see why it's attracted people. I'm cautiously optimistic for Halloween Kills. Chalk that up to the fact that they considered Paul Rudd to come back as Tommy Doyle, but chalk it up to that. But I am actually excited with what I'm hearing that they're gonna apparently switch protagonists to somebody new who's like outside of the family. I think that'd be very, very interesting. Like that we're not so slavishly devoted to following Laurie's story. I'm excited for the next one, but as far as Halloween 2018, it was a disappointment for me. But I look forward to where the franchise goes, and people are excited about Michael again. People are going back to watch these movies, and I like introducing these to friends, family, everything. Over summer, actually, I watched Halloween 6 with my brother, who had never watched any of the Halloween movies before, and we had a friggin' blast. He loved the movie. He thinks Michael Myers is awesome, and I think that the 2018 film really sparked a collective interest in the character that hasn't been here for a long time. I'd say since probably the 90s, even maybe you could argue a little bit with the 2000s with Rob Zombie, but it's it's glad to have Michael back, and I'm glad to have my Halloween back.
And also between the It movies and Halloween 2018, the success of those three movies, it kind of just put a shot of adrenaline into the horror genre, and it's become like the most successful genre on the box office for quite a while now.
Yeah, I think aside
Yeah,
from
I'd agree with that.
yeah, so yeah, you don't have to leave till 4:30, right, Michael?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you guys
But
want to go on? Go on.
just real quick, as far as 2018 goes, I thought for sure, I knew that Will didn't like it, and I knew how much I liked it. So I thought he was going to say a lot of things that I disagreed with, but nothing he really says I fully disagree with. It's just one of those things where two people watching the exact same film and having completely different reactions to it, and I don't think any of us are wrong about it. But I think it's fascinating to hear different opinions like this, because I do, because a lot of things that I loved about it is what turned a lot of people off, and Will is by far not alone on this. There's a lot of haters for Halloween 2018.
I mean, just
I think that like the stuff that you got out of it is very valid, and I think that there are points of merit. There are definitely points of merit to the film, but I think what your reaction to it's going to be like, do the points of merit outweigh the problems that you have with it? And for me, the problems outweigh the points of merit, and for you, it's the other way around. And I'm just excited for the next one. So
I mean, it's fascinating that we could have such different reactions, because like you were telling me how like the opening scene doesn't work for you, it's kind of cheesy and stuff. And for me, when I hear it, it's like, man, it had the exact opposite. I had goosebumps crawling up. I got a sense of like, oh my God, that's the boogeyman. It's Michael Myers. But looking back, it's very heightened in the way that scene is edited together, is really frazzled. So I could see from a certain perspective why that might strike someone as cheesy. But as someone who's, I guess, I'm willing to go along with it of what they're trying to achieve, for me, it just felt kind of fucking awesome, to be honest. I loved the opening sequence of the new Halloween, and I loved that they go back to the original credits by a rotting pumpkin coming back to life. It's just, as a fanboy of the original, I guess this movie was uniquely catered to the fanboys of the people who are bigger on the original than they are on the sequels or the rest of them. It's definitely a catered movie.
Yeah.
And I mean, hopefully it'll be sort of like, it's cursed words for me to even say this, but because I feel like this is almost just subconsciously damning the whole thing. But I almost hope in this one aspect that it's like the Star Wars sequel trilogy, where it's like the first one was, trying to emulate the original, and then with trying to emulate the original trilogy, and then with the subsequent films, like they took more inspiration from the prequels and the expanded material, like after like listening to like fans of those films, of which there are definitely a lot out there. I'm hoping these Halloween films will have this Halloween trilogy will have like that same direction, because like I said, they did consider bringing Paul Rudd back as Tommy Doyle. Danielle Harris has talked a lot about these movies. I don't know if Blumhouse or Universal has spoken to her, but I would not be surprised for 1 second if she ended up coming back in some way or another. Like even if she's playing a completely different character. But I'm excited for the next one. I hope that they find some way to like maybe win over fans of some of the sequels.
I think there's ways.
Yeah.
We skipped over the Rob Zombie ones just so we could get through the main series, and really that's a completely different continuity than the other ones. Do you want to get into those for whatever time you have, Michael?
Yeah. First of all, I don't like either one of them. I do like the first Rob Zombie's first Halloween much better than the second one. The opening scene was effective. William Forsythe is good in it. The guy who played the little boy, the little boy was good in it.
Big Fish, I think his name.
Yeah. And that was like a good 30 minutes, right, where they explored his childhood.
Actually, it's almost a full hour before the part of the movie that's actually a remake of the original Halloween kicks in. So I'd say roughly about half of the movie is entirely new material.
Yeah, so I enjoyed it up to that point, but once it got to full-grown Michael Myers, I didn't find anything interesting about it. The kills felt like Friday the 13th kills, just a big, tall brute smashing people's heads and stabbing
How
people.
does
It's
he?
just
How
constant.
does he grow? How does he grow from like just a little like sweet little boy to like a fucking mountain? I mean,
Yeah.
that was
Evil within, bro. It's the evil within. Just kidding.
yeah. He was getting gains in
Listen to this
Smith's
podcast,
Grove.
or I'll gut you.
Okay.
But I also must say that Scout Taylor Compton, holy shit, for being two movies that I did not like that much at all, she was sure awesome in them. Her acting was natural, and her screaming was almost too real. She screamed bloody murder through both of those films. My God, dude.
Okay, so I have a weird relationship to the Rob Zombie's Halloween. Having watched it again, I'm gonna admit I like it, even though this is not my idea of Michael Myers, and there's a part of me that thinks Rob Zombie totally missed the point of the character. I like it as a reimagining of a more human boogeyman, if that makes sense. Where, okay, the original Halloween has the quality of, to me anyway, of a bedtime story, of a fable, of a myth, just good versus evil. The way that I look at Rob Zombie's approach is, okay, let's take that fable and let's take that myth and let's turn it into something a little bit more human and a little bit more real. And I think in that regard, for me, it works. I like all of the stuff that reimagines Michael Myers' childhood. Granted, again, this is not my idea of Michael Myers, but for a reimagining, since this is a reimagining and it's not continuing the original timeline, I'm a little more willing to accept that as a separate entity. I like everything with Michael Myers growing up and his stuff in the mental institute. Actually, I take that back. Not everything. I think that it could have dialed back the white trashiness, the kind of over-the-top hillbilly grunge that is a hallmark of Rob Zombie's aesthetic. And I get that. That's part of what he does, and it works really well for movies like The Devil's Rejects, but it's a questionable choice for Halloween. But I digress. It kind of works, and there's like such a bleakness to this movie that I felt kind of the weight of how awful everything was watching it again, watching him as a child, watching the things that he goes through, the things that like disturb him. It kind of makes sense to me that that kid would grow up to be that kind of monster who found a certain type of evil within himself and just hit himself with that and threw his entire soul completely into that. Now that doesn't that does not explain his big flare up where he goes from this tiny kid to this hulking giant, but okay, whatever. But I think it's actually an interesting exploration of a more human boogeyman, and it hurts. I don't know. This is a Halloween movie that hurts. I actually feel bad for him. I feel bad for the family. I feel bad for the mother. And the deaths are so brutal and so painful that they kind of register. Now, there could be a lot less shaky cam. They could dial back the white trashiness of this a little bit. Rob Zombie needed to focus a little bit more. The second half feels kind of like a rushed remake of the original one in a certain way. I can't tell when this is supposed to take place. I don't know what he's going for, if this takes place in the 60s or the 70s, because it seems like it takes place over the span of 15 years, and it all sounds like they're listening to 70s music. They have Don't Fear the Reaper on, and they're still playing Don't Fear the Reaper later in the movie. So as far as the era goes, I'm not really sure that they even really thought that out. And then they have Dr. Loomis talking about cell phones, and that doesn't make sense that 15 years ago teenagers would be listening to Don't Fear the Reaper. So there's a lot of questionable stuff in there as far as the timeline goes. But I kind of liked it. I think it's an interesting reimagining of the Halloween mythology, and I could accept it as its own thing, if that makes sense. Still acknowledging its flaws, but the more I watch it, the more I've come around to kind of liking or understanding Rob Zombie's point of view and kind of what he was going for. So I like this movie despite my complaints. All right, Will.
All right. So earlier when I complimented Halloween 6 by saying that it gave us vague answers that didn't explain too much and still kept some mystery,
Mm-hmm.
this is what mean by like giving answers that like completely throw any mystery out the window and aren't vague. Okay, so why does Michael kill? And in Halloween 6, it's like we don't know. It probably has something to do with Thorn, but we don't know what Thorn is. We don't know anything about it, other than it has supernatural ties to Halloween. Rob Zombie's remake. Why does Michael kill? He was raised in an abusive household, and people were shitty to him, and everyone around him is just the most evil person in the entire world, to the point where his stepfather is like making objectifying comments about his stepsister, which was just so cringy and just awful to sit through. The acting is fantastic, and I think that's probably the only thing I really like about the first Halloween. I think the first Rob Zombie's Halloween. I think all of the acting in the first Rob Zombie's Halloween is great. Even Malcolm McDowell as Loomis, who I don't like this version of Loomis at all. I think it's a complete betrayal of what Loomis should stand for. I think Rob Zombie completely missed the point of the character. It's probably the biggest failing of the film is this handling of Loomis, where he's just this
and
greedy.
It gets worse in the second one.
Oh yeah, gets way worse in the second one. I don't like the tone that this film has. It feels like a Halloween film for people who don't like the holiday of Halloween, which is weird because I know for a fact that that's like Rob Zombie's thing. He loves Halloween. He loves the holiday. He loves everything about that. But everything about this take of the Halloween holiday is just so mean-spirited and unpleasant and gross. It's not fun in any way, and
It's
I
bleakest, roughest out of all of the movies to come out up into, and I don't. Yeah, it is well, other than the second one, it's the bleakest, the roughest one, and it kind of has
just
a nasty worldview, a mean
and
spirit.
it's just ugly. It's just a very ugly film. Like I don't find it entertaining. I think that I think this version of Michael just isn't very interesting at all. Despite Dave Fairch's best efforts, his performance is fantastic. God bless him. What I was bringing up earlier about Halloween 5 and how it like did the relationship between Loomis and Michael in a very subtle way, about them like maybe having some kind of friendship or attachment. Here, Loomis literally just flat out says, "You've been sort of like my best friend," and it's like you couldn't show that. You had to like say it in like just really blatant dialogue. And that's another thing. Like Loomis has like no memorable lines in this apart from like maybe the seminar speech that he gives. That's pretty much it. And I think apart from Loomis, the biggest failing of the Rob Zombie remake, the first one, is it doesn't know what it wants to be. Does it want to be a prequel? Does it want to be a complete reimagining? Does it want to be a faithful remake? It kind of alternates between all these different visions, and they aren't cohesive. They don't flow together at all, and we just end up with a mess. And that's a big reason why I actually prefer the second Rob Zombie Halloween, even though it's flawed as hell, but it definitely feels a lot more like a personal vision from Rob Zombie. It feels more like he was allowing himself to do his own thing. After the first Rob Zombie Halloween, I think there were a lot of expectations for what kind of film he was supposed to make, and I think he chickened out in a lot of ways towards making the film that he wanted to make. With his second film, he definitely made the film he wanted to make, and I think that there are a lot of solid aspects of it, even if the lows are very low.
I finally rewatched Halloween 2. So Halloween was a big success, right, Mike? 2007. I remember it making a big splash when it came out. People
yes, $77.5 million.
Yeah, I remember going to see it. So yeah, I get all of your guys' criticisms, and I think they're all valid, but I could appreciate it as a reimagining. If it were part of the original storyline, if they tried to like incorporate it that no, this was the original one, then I would probably like it a hell of a lot less, honestly. But I think it's kind of fascinating what Rob Zombie's reimagining and his take on the mythology is. And you said he had freedom with the second one. he might have had too much freedom with the second one because it no longer feels like a Halloween movie. This just feels like
Oh, absolutely. It does not feel like a Halloween movie.
Yeah. Yeah, Halloween 2. I kind of really hated this movie the first time I seen it, and I have to be honest, I didn't finish it the first time I'd seen it because it became really monotonous, and I actually turned it off because I found myself actively annoyed at what's going on. This is too grungy for my taste, where the grunginess and the grittiness is so in your face and so over the top, and everybody behaves in the most squealing, awful way. It's kind of like 31, the Rob Zombie movie, which I also fucking hate that movie.
Yeah,
I don't like.
Oh, I hate that film too.
Ugh, the way
Film
that
sucked.
this and 31 revel in their trashiness and their nastiness, where every character looks like they just woke up and like scraped grime off of their face. Yeah, Michael Myers grunting, like making way too many noises, and at the end to actually have him scream, "Die!" at Dr. Loomis when he actually speaks. I'm like, did they actually do that? And to have his mask off for that long and for the camera to linger on, because Halloween 2018 plays with it a little bit, but it's only quick glimpses where you see his face. The camera never stays on long enough to like really get a look at his face, whereas this one kind of like brings mystery, and then he just looks like some big hulking, I don't know, some big redneck dude with a beard. And the kill scenes are unimaginative. I think they're kind of effective because they're so brutal, but just the endless stabbing and slashing,
Stab, yeah.
it just becomes like a headache. I think this opening scene is ugly, but there's something kind of effective about it. And the original one is ugly, and it is a rough movie that kind of expresses a very bleak worldview and outlook. But for me, it kind of worked in that one where I felt like the commitment to it, where this one is so bleak and so ugly that it almost goes back around to becoming a parody of itself, where it's too bleak, it's too ugly, it's too filthy. There's just so many things that I don't like about it. I think there's some fascinating imagery going on in here, especially with the white horse, although it's really confusing as what all this actually means. I think I have some ideas in my head about like Michael kind of living in his headspace with that. And I think it kind of plays for me as like a test run for The Lords of Salem, which is another Rob Zombie movie that uses a lot of artsy imagery. Although I think that movie is much more effective at achieving it. This kind of feel like the morsels of it coming out in this one. And it's too, I don't know, it's so bleak that it's really joyless and monotonous for my taste. And I know that this movie over the years has its fan base because most people hate Halloween 2, but there is a group of people out there, like a dedicated fan base, a cult base, who will tell you that this is the best Halloween movie. I've heard a few people argue that. I've never understood it, but alas, everybody has different opinions.
Yeah. And sadly, I don't even have much of opinion on this. I didn't
Listen to
I
this
was too busy
podcast,
watching all the other
or I'll
Halloween
gut
movies, and this is probably my least favorite out of everything. And it just, I remember just disliking it so much. Like everything I liked about the first Rob Zombie's Halloween was gone, and it's just monotonous is the best way to describe it. Just the hack and slash, smashing heads through the whole thing. There was nothing interesting about it to me. The whole Sherry Moon zombie on the white horse was confusing. It kind of seemed desperate just to make something different and bring you closer into Michael's headspace. But I just found nothing interesting about it, nothing to really hold my interest at all.
What about you, Will?
Like I was saying earlier, this film is incredibly flawed. This is the worst version of Loomis and Michael we will probably ever see, and as a Halloween film, it fails. It fails as a Halloween film. As its own slasher, I think it's all right. Whenever I watch Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, I always have to go into it telling myself, this is not a Halloween film. This is a slasher film that just happens to have the Halloween name. And I find myself enjoying it a lot more then. I think, I feel like that in terms of the three films we got that explored Laurie's trauma, which is this one, H2O, and Halloween 2018, I think this one did it the most maturely for me. I feel so badly for Laurie in this one. I think that when her friend Annie dies, that is like such a heartbreaking moment for me. And I think what makes it work for me is just how harsh this film really is. I think it feels a lot more authentic than the first film to me. Annie is fantastic in this film, probably easily the most likable character in the movie, and I think she's I think that she's portrayed in a very authentic way, and she really helps to grounds the Laurie trauma subplot a lot more. She really helps it. Brad Dourif's performance is amazing. That scene where he comes into his daughter's death and he cries is just so heart-wrenching. And they play the montage of the young Danielle Harris clips. It works so well. I think all the stuff with the core survivors, Laurie, Annie, and her dad, that stuff is fantastic, and it redeems the film for me. But that being said, there's some really bad stuff for this film to redeem, and if that's too much for people to overlook, if zombie Michael, the repetitive stabbing, die, if that's too much for people, I totally get it. I will not die on a hill defending Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, but for me, I think of all the Halloween films since Halloween 6, it's probably my favorite. But I have to tell myself, this is not a Halloween film. This is just a slasher film that has the name.
Okay, so watching it again, the scenes that you're talking about, one where Laurie finds Annie and the other one where her dad, Sheriff Brackett, finds him, I admit those scenes are actually really impressive. But this movie wallows in so much despair and misery that it starts, and I get what they're trying to do. I get it. You're trying to show the real trauma of horror. I get that. But it starts to cease to feel like a horror movie, where it just starts to feel like numbing, grinding misery and pain and suffering. And I think that's why it's not enjoyable to me. Those couple scenes that you mentioned are well executed, but they don't even feel like horror. It feels like he's in the midst of all this nastiness, all this exploitation, all this grime, and this monotonous violence. To shove such brutally bleak emotional scenes just seems strange to me. Like, it doesn't, I don't know. There's just something about this that leaves me with like a negative feeling, and not in a good way. If that makes sense.
It's a messy film. It's definitely a messy film, but I think that the more human scenes with the survivors, I think really helped to pull it above water and keep it from sinking for me. But if I can totally see why people find just like the grime and the nastiness too much, because I mean I had the same reaction to the first Rob Zombie Halloween movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I definitely have a lot of respect for the acting in both of these, especially like I said, Scott Taylor Compton and Danielle Harris. So
they're fantastic.
Brad Dourif. Yeah, great acting in both of them, even though I didn't like 2 at all.
Yeah. So that's the Halloween franchise. We covered them all. We did Halloween 1. We did the entire franchise, guys. We got through this. How do you feel?
That was fun. I love doing that. I love talking these movies. I loved hearing what you guys had to say about them, even when you disagreed. Sometimes, especially when you disagreed. Because I like being I like just being informed on different takes on them, and I like hearing what attracts you guys to these movies. And so like maybe next time I watch them, I can come away with a different perspective, I guess.
I must say, Will, you're a very good guest, and we would like to have you back to discuss some other films.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'd be honored to come back.
I had a lot of fun.
So that's about it. That's all we have today for our podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. I actually think that this is probably our best rundown of anything that we did all month. I think we did a good job. I like the variety of opinions in here. Next month should be exciting. We're going to be getting some guests in. We're going to have sometime next month, I can't reveal when, we're going to have Adam Marcus, the director of Jason Goes to Hell, doing an interview on here to celebrate the new release of the new Friday the 13th box set. And we have some other exciting guests and a lot of things coming up in the future. Lots of good
that'll be fun.
Podcast. Yeah.
I always had like a ton of respect for Adam Marcus, and I enjoy Jason Goes to Hell more than most.
So do I.
Even if ironically, but
And we're not sure when yet, but we're gonna have Denise Richards in to talk about Tammy and the T-Rex.
Which is one of our favorite horror comedies here. If you
I
haven't
love
seen
that
it,
movie.
we'll check it
I
out.
love Tammy and the T-Rex.
Okay, cool. That shit, Andy, I cannot wait to discuss that with her. Well, check us out on Facebook.com, Facebook.com/Pickles Horror Show, and then check us out on Instagram.com. Check us out on Instagram at Pickles Horror Show. We're also going to put a link to our Flow page in here. It's going to have a link to our podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and SoundCloud. Keep tuning in. We got a lot of exciting stuff, and hopefully we'll have Will back sometime to discuss another franchise. All right.
And happy Halloween to everyone. Have a good day tomorrow. Be safe.
Have a good day today. It's going to be
yeah. By the time you hear this, it'll be Halloween. So I hope you're having an awesome one.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.